What I wish I knew before diving headfirst into this rabbit hole. What I wish I knew before I started questioning everything I thought I understood about the world around us. What I wish I knew before I stumbled upon the unsettling reality of weather control. It's a field shrouded in secrecy, whispered about in hushed tones, and often dismissed as mere conspiracy theory. But the more I've dug, the more I've realized that there's something very real and very significant happening right above our heads. I wish I knew the sheer complexity of the science involved, the ethical minefield it presents, and the potential global impact it could have. About weather control, about the sheer audacity of attempting to manipulate the very forces that shape our planet, about the history of these attempts, dating back decades, and the advancements that have been made in recent years, about the different technologies being employed, from cloud seeding to more exotic and controversial methods, about the potential benefits like mitigating droughts and preventing natural disasters, and about the potential risks like unintended consequences and the weaponization of weather. It's a field that demands careful consideration, not just from scientists and policymakers, but from all of us. Before I believed it was all rumors, before I dismissed it as just another internet conspiracy, fueled by misinformation and paranoia, before I rolled my eyes at the mention of chemtrails and government plots, I used to think it was all just a harmless fantasy, a way for people to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. But then I started seeing the evidence, reading the scientific papers, and talking to the experts. And I realized that while some of the claims out there are certainly exaggerated, there's a kernel of truth at the heart of it all. The reality is far more nuanced and far more concerning than I ever imagined. Turns out the truth is stranger than fiction. It's a story that involves cutting-edge science, global politics, and the very future of our planet. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about what's possible and what's ethical. It's a story that forces us to confront the immense power we now wield and the responsibility that comes with it. The more I've learned, the more I've realized that this is a conversation we need to be having, openly and honestly. Because the decisions we make about weather control today will have profound consequences for generations to come. This isn't just about science, it's about our values, our priorities, and our vision for the future. Let's break it down. Let's dissect the science, examine the ethics, and explore the real-world impact of weather control. Let's separate fact from fiction and understand the complexities of this controversial field. We'll look at the history of weather modification, the technologies currently being used, and the potential future applications. We'll also delve into the ethical dilemmas it presents, the potential risks and benefits, and the implications for global governance. This is a complex issue, but it's one that we can all understand if we're willing to take the time to learn. So, let's get started. Here's the deal. Weather control is no longer a thing of science fiction. It's not just a plot device in a Hollywood movie. It's a real and rapidly developing field of science and technology. Governments and corporations around the world are investing heavily in weather modification research and development. They're conducting experiments, deploying technologies, and exploring the potential to manipulate the weather for a variety of purposes. This isn't just about rainmaking, it's about controlling hurricanes, suppressing hail, and even mitigating climate change. The stakes are high, and the potential rewards are enormous, but so are the risks. Weather manipulation or weather control is real. It's a tangible capability that exists today, not just in theory, but in practice. We have the technology to influence weather patterns to a certain extent. We can seed clouds to increase rainfall, we can use lasers to dissipate fog, and we can even deploy aerosols to reflect sunlight. These technologies are constantly evolving, becoming more sophisticated and more effective. And as they do, the potential to control the weather becomes more and more real. But with this power comes a great responsibility. We need to understand the potential consequences of our actions before we unleash these technologies on a global scale, and it's a hot topic. It's a subject of intense debate among scientists, policymakers, and the public. Some argue that weather control is a necessary tool to combat climate change and address water scarcity. Others warn of the potential for unintended consequences and the ethical implications of manipulating the natural world. There are concerns about the environmental impact of weather modification technologies, the potential for weaponization, and the fairness of distributing weather resources. These are complex issues with no easy answers, and they require careful consideration and open dialogue. From droughts to wildfires, the effects of climate change are becoming increasingly apparent. We're seeing more extreme weather events, more frequent and intense droughts, and more devastating wildfires. These events are causing widespread damage, displacing communities and threatening livelihoods. And they're putting immense pressure on our resources and infrastructure. The need for solutions is urgent. We need to find ways to mitigate the effects of climate change and adapt to a changing world. People are desperate for solutions. They're looking for ways to protect their communities, their livelihoods, and their future. They're demanding action from their governments and from the international community, and they're willing to consider even radical solutions like weather control. But we need to be careful not to rush into anything without fully understanding the potential consequences. We need to weigh the risks and benefits and make informed decisions based on sound science and ethical considerations. Desperation can lead to rash decisions, and we can't afford to make mistakes when it comes to something as critical as the weather. But what happens when we start tinkering with the delicate balance of nature? What happens when we try to play God, manipulating the very forces that have shaped our planet for billions of years? What are the potential consequences of disrupting natural weather patterns? Could we inadvertently trigger unforeseen disasters? Could we create new problems while trying to solve old ones? These are questions that scientists are grappling with as they explore the possibilities of weather control. And they're questions that we all need to be asking ourselves. Trying to play with nature's rules? Nature is a complex and interconnected system. Every element plays a role and every action has a consequence. When we interfere with this system, we risk disrupting the delicate balance that sustains life on Earth. We may think we know what we're doing, but the truth is that we often underestimate the complexity of nature, and we may not fully understand the long-term consequences of our actions. So we need to proceed with caution and with a deep respect for the power and resilience of nature. The big idea? The grand vision? The promise of a world where we can control the weather, prevent natural disasters, and ensure a stable climate for all. It's a tempting vision, one that has captivated scientists and policymakers for decades. But is it a realistic vision? And is it a desirable one? These are questions that we need to consider carefully before we commit to pursuing weather control on a large scale. The big idea may sound appealing, but the devil is in the details. Techniques like cloud seeding have been around for decades. It's one of the most widely used and well-established weather modification techniques. It involves injecting substances like silver iodide into clouds to promote the formation of ice crystals, which can then lead to increased rainfall or snowfall. Cloud seeding has been used in various parts of the world to augment water supplies, suppress hail, and even clear fog. But its effectiveness is still debated, and there are concerns about its environmental impact. Where planes spray chemicals into clouds is a common sight in some regions. These planes are equipped with specialized equipment that releases the seeding agents into the atmosphere. The chemicals then interact with the water droplets in the clouds, causing them to freeze and grow into larger ice crystals. These ice crystals eventually become heavy enough to fall as rain or snow. The process is relatively simple, but the science behind it is complex. And there are still many unanswered questions about its effectiveness and its potential side effects. To make it rain, or to increase snowfall. The goal is to enhance precipitation in areas that are experiencing drought or water scarcity. Cloud seeding can also be used to suppress hail, which can damage crops and property. And it can even be used to clear fog, which can disrupt air travel and other activities. But the effectiveness of cloud seeding depends on a variety of factors, including the type of clouds, the atmospheric conditions, and the amount of seeding agent used. And there's no guarantee that it will always work as intended, are already in use in places like various countries around the world. Weather modification is not just a theoretical concept, it's a practical reality that is being implemented in many different regions. Some countries are using it to address water scarcity, others to protect their crops, and still others to mitigate the effects of climate change. The scale and scope of these operations vary widely, but the underlying goal is the same: to manipulate the weather for human benefit. China has been a major proponent of weather modification for decades. The country has invested heavily in cloud seeding technology and has used it extensively to increase rainfall in arid regions and to clear the air during major events. China's weather modification program is one of the largest and most ambitious in the world, and it has played a significant role in the country's efforts to address water scarcity and improve air quality. The U.S. has also been involved in weather modification research and development for many years. The U.S. government has funded various cloud seeding projects, and private companies have also been active in this field. Weather modification has been used in the US to augment water supplies, suppress hail, and even to try to weaken hurricanes. However, the US program has been less centralized and less ambitious than China's and the Middle East. Countries in the Middle East are particularly interested in weather modification due to the region's arid climate and limited water resources. Cloud seeding has been used extensively in the Middle East to increase rainfall and to address water scarcity. Some countries are also exploring more advanced weather modification technologies, such as using lasers to stimulate rainfall. The need for water is driving innovation and investment in weather modification in this region. There's even talk of geoengineering, which takes weather modification to a whole new level. Geoengineering involves large-scale interventions in the Earth's climate system to counteract the effects of climate change. These interventions could include injecting aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight, or deploying giant mirrors in space to reduce solar radiation. Geoengineering is a highly controversial topic as it carries significant risks and uncertainties. But some argue that it may be necessary to avert catastrophic climate change, huge projects to fundamentally alter the Earth's climate. These projects would require massive investments of resources and would have far-reaching consequences for the entire planet. They would also raise complex ethical and political questions about who gets to control the Earth's climate and how the risks and benefits are distributed. Geoengineering is not a simple solution to climate change. It's a complex and potentially dangerous undertaking. Reflect sunlight back into space. This would reduce the amount of solar radiation that reaches the Earth's surface, thereby cooling the planet. One proposed method involves injecting aerosols into the stratosphere, which would create a reflective layer that would bounce sunlight back into space. Another method involves deploying giant mirrors in space to deflect sunlight away from the Earth. These methods are technically feasible, but they carry significant risks and uncertainties, or suck carbon from the sky. This would remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, thereby reducing the greenhouse effect and cooling the planet. One proposed method involves planting vast forests to absorb carbon dioxide from the air. Another method involves developing technologies to capture carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere and store it underground. These methods are less risky than solar radiation management, but they are also more expensive and less effective in the short term. Sounds cool, doesn't it? Like something out of a science fiction movie. The idea of controlling the weather and manipulating the climate is certainly appealing. It offers the promise of solving some of the world's most pressing problems, from climate change to water scarcity. But we need to be realistic about the challenges and the risks involved. Weather control is not a magic bullet, and it's not a substitute for addressing the root causes of climate change. But it's complicated. The Earth's climate system is incredibly complex, and we don't fully understand how it works. When we interfere with this system, we risk triggering unforeseen consequences. We could inadvertently disrupt natural weather patterns, cause unintended environmental damage, or even create new problems while trying to solve old ones. So, we need to proceed with caution and with a deep understanding of the complexities involved. Here's where it gets tricky. The ethical implications of weather control are profound. Who gets to decide how the weather is manipulated? Who benefits from these technologies, and who bears the risks? What happens when weather modification in one region has unintended consequences in another region? These are difficult questions with no easy answers, and they require careful consideration and open dialogue. Messing with the weather can have unintended consequences. We might think we're solving a problem in one area, but we could be creating a bigger problem somewhere else. For example, cloud seeding to increase rainfall in one region could potentially reduce rainfall in another region. Or geoengineering to cool the planet could have unforeseen effects on ecosystems and agriculture. The Earth's climate system is interconnected, and any intervention can have ripple effects that are difficult to predict. Could help crops grow by providing much-needed rainfall during droughts. Weather modification could potentially increase agricultural productivity and improve food security in regions that are vulnerable to drought. But it could also disrupt natural weather patterns and have negative impacts on other ecosystems. So, we need to weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks, or reduce heat waves by reflecting sunlight back into space. Geoengineering could potentially mitigate the effects of climate change and reduce the frequency and intensity of heat waves. But it could also have unforeseen consequences for the Earth's climate system, And it could raise complex ethical and political questions about who gets to control the planet's temperature, but it also raises big questions. Questions about ethics, about responsibility, and about the potential for unintended consequences. Questions that we need to answer before we unleash these technologies on a global scale. Questions that will shape the future of our planet. What if we accidentally cause a major environmental disaster? What if our attempts to control the weather backfire and lead to unforeseen consequences? What if we disrupt natural weather patterns and create new problems while trying to solve old ones? These are risks that we need to consider carefully before we proceed with weather modification on a large scale. Floods in one region while trying to alleviate drought in another? What if our attempts to increase rainfall in one area lead to excessive precipitation and flooding in a neighboring area? The Earth's climate system is interconnected, and any intervention can have ripple effects that are difficult to predict. Or droughts in areas that depend on natural rainfall patterns? What if our attempts to suppress hail in one region lead to reduced precipitation and drought in another region? We need to be aware of the potential for unintended consequences and to proceed with caution. Somewhere else? The effects of weather modification can extend far beyond the intended target area. What happens when our actions in one country have negative consequences in another country? Who is responsible for addressing these consequences? These are complex questions that require international cooperation and agreement. Who decides who gets rain and who doesn't? Who has the authority to manipulate the weather, and how is that authority exercised? What are the criteria for deciding when and where to intervene in the Earth's climate system? These are fundamental questions about power and control. And who doesn't? Will weather modification technologies be used to benefit everyone, or will they be used to exacerbate existing inequalities? Will the rich and powerful have access to these technologies, while the poor and vulnerable are left to suffer the consequences? These are questions of social justice and equity. In 2008, China famously used its weather modification capabilities to ensure clear skies for the Beijing Olympics. This was a highly visible demonstration of the country's technological prowess and its commitment to hosting a successful event. But it also raised questions about the ethics of manipulating the weather for political purposes. Cloud seeding on a massive scale to prevent rain from disrupting the opening ceremony. The government deployed hundreds of rockets to seed clouds and disperse any potential rainfall. The operation was widely publicized and hailed as a success, but it also sparked debate about the potential environmental impacts of such large-scale weather modification. To clear the skies and create a perfect backdrop for the Olympic Games, the government wanted to ensure that the opening ceremony was not marred by rain or pollution, and they were willing to use weather modification technology to achieve that goal for the Beijing Olympics. It was a moment of national pride and a demonstration of China's technological capabilities, but it also served as a reminder of the potential power and the potential risks of weather control. Success? Sure, in the sense that the skies were clear and the opening ceremony went off without a hitch. But at what cost, and what were the potential environmental consequences of such a large-scale weather modification operation? But it's also a reminder that just because we have the technology to do something doesn't mean we should. It's a reminder that we need to consider the ethical implications of our actions and the potential consequences for the environment and for society. That just because we can manipulate the weather doesn't give us the right to do so without considering the potential consequences. We need to be responsible stewards of the planet and to use our technology wisely. Doesn't mean we should. We need to exercise caution and restraint when it comes to weather control. We need to weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks and to make informed decisions based on sound science and ethical considerations. The risks are real, and they need to be taken seriously. Weather control is not a game, and it's not something to be taken lightly. The potential consequences of our actions could be far-reaching and irreversible, and so is the debate. The debate about the ethics, the risks, and the benefits of weather control is ongoing, and it's a debate that we all need to be a part of. Bottom line, weather control is a reality. It's here, it's happening, and it's going to continue to evolve. We can't ignore it, and we can't pretend that it doesn't exist. Weather control tech is here, and it's only going to become more sophisticated and more powerful in the years to come. We need to be prepared for the challenges and the opportunities that this technology presents, and it could shape our future. It could help us to mitigate the effects of climate change, to address water scarcity, and to prevent natural disasters. but it could also lead to unintended consequences, ethical dilemmas, and even conflict. But with great power comes great responsibility. This is a lesson that we need to learn and to apply to all of our technological endeavors, especially when it comes to something as powerful and as potentially disruptive as weather control. Comes great responsibility. We have a moral obligation to use our technology wisely and to consider the potential consequences of our actions. We need to be responsible stewards of the planet and to protect the environment for future generations. Should we use these tools to manipulate the weather and to control the climate? Or should we take a more hands-off approach and let nature take its course? Or leave the weather alone? That's the fundamental question that we need to answer, and it's a question that requires careful consideration, open dialogue, and a deep understanding of the science, the ethics, and the potential consequences of weather control. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you think about weather control. Do you believe it's a necessary tool to combat climate change? Or do you think it's too risky and that we should leave the weather alone? Share your opinions and let's have a discussion. And if you want more wild science stories and explorations of cutting-edge technologies, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for new and exciting topics to explore. Check out my other videos on a variety of science and technology topics. You might find something that sparks your curiosity and inspires you to learn more on environmental breakthroughs. Let's continue to explore the fascinating world of science together.